Cool.
Johnny Max in the house. How are you, John?
Very well, thanks, Gordon. How are you?
I'm good. Have you heard have you been watching the news this morning, the BBC and whatever?
I actually have not. What's been going on?
Well, you're a football fan, aren't you?
I'm indeed, yeah.
Who do you support? Villa?
Birmingham City fan. Oh, what's
Villa.
happened?
I'm sure it's Villa, wasn't it?
No, absolutely not. I'm a Birmingham City fan.
Okay, all right. So have you heard what they're doing? You know, obviously, are you a season ticket holder or anything like that?
Nah. Well, I haven't lived in Birmingham for the past few years, so
Do
nah.
you
But I go down when I
games,
can.
like, have you got a package or anything like that on Sky or BT, etc.?
Yeah. There's a thing called Blues TV. You can watch it. Oh, I know where this is going. Actually, they're going to charge £15 a game to stream.
So, Dave, obviously when COVID hit, what was it, in March? What they did was all the games were shown at the end of the season, weren't they? All the games that were behind closed doors, they were all shown on like Sky Sports but I think even didn't the BBC have a couple of games as well?
I think so. There was another channel on Freeview called, like, I forget what it was called, like Plus Now or something. Anyway, but you could.
So
you
they
could watch
showed them all
well.
free, right? Then obviously the closed season happens, and all the millionaires, they all go on holiday. And when I say millionaires, I mean the millionaires who are playing football for the billionaires who are trying to make money out of this. And in the few weeks that were closed, up until the end of when did the transfer season end? Was it a few days ago? The transfer.
It was very recently, yeah.
Do you know how much they spent on players in the Premier League?
Go on.
1.8 billion.
Jesus Christ.
You know the agents for those footballers combined, just the agents' fees were 200 million quid, there or thereabouts.
Bloody hell.
And now the season started again, right? And now they've gone to the fans and said, we're going to need you to pay £15 for half of all the games now. So half of the games up until the end of the month, they're going to be charging 15 quid for. On top of
what's gonna happen with the other ones? What happens with the other half? Are they on Sky or what?
I think it's still going to be on BT Sports and what have you, but you're still going to pay a subscription to Sky, to BT Sports, to etc. etc. You've still, obviously, there were people out there who are season tickets, and they've actually had their season tickets deferred until next year, and there are some non-league teams or lower league teams that are doing a deferment payment, so they're basically letting their fans watch 3 games at home for 1 ticket that they paid for. But what do you think about it? This is the thing. This is the question I had in the shower this morning. Was I thought about that 1.8 billion, and I thought, do you think these Premier League clubs pulled that money out their ass, or do you think they went to the bank and got loans?
I would say a lot of them are sitting on an incredible amount of capital, to be honest.
Yes.
I mean, I was watching that Tottenham documentary recently. Did you see that on Amazon Prime?
No.
It was actually quite good. But that club, from when Alan Sugar owned it back in the early 2000s, when it was worth something like 30 million, now it's worth well over £1 billion. So football clubs are just, especially if they're doing well in the Premiership, like Liverpool is just astronomically rich now. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know much about the economics of football, but
well, neither do I.
Yeah,
but
I mean, they're sitting on a wild amount of money.
That's why I'm asking the question. The thing is, I just think it's totally unfair that, I mean, you know, I keep hearing these football clubs say that, the clubs are nothing without the supporters. It's like, no, it seems like the clubs are nothing without the supporters' money. That's all really they seem to want. They've spent 1.8 billion in a few weeks, just splashed it out, knowing that they're not going to be getting that money from games and what have you. I mean, no club is going to look at it and think, okay, we're going to return to normalcy anytime this side of Christmas, surely.
Yeah.
So they've still gone out and recklessly just spent all that money on transferring a load of millionaires between their clubs. And then now they're going to go back out to the fans and say, spend 15 quid on your ticket. There was a great tweet by Trevor Sinclair on this, and he said, no thanks, I'm not going to pay 15 quid for a sterile version of the game I played. I'll go down my local pitch, I'll watch the local football this weekend, and then I'll get some chips and curry sauce on the way home.
Yeah, maybe the coronavirus will be the source of the regeneration of local football.
I really
support.
hope so. I really hope.
But yeah,
so.
I mean, as you were saying, I mean, it just follows the same logic as austerity in general, doesn't it? I mean, they want to go on as normal. So what are they going to do? They're going to continue to do what they did and transfer the costs onto the people. Well, the people down below, such as us, to watch the games. It's just the same logic as any other financial crisis, because obviously people can't go to the games. There's obviously a massive. Well, we're already in a recession, but it's going to get worse and worse. Unemployment's going to skyrocket. So they're starting to think, oh well, maybe people aren't going to be coming to games at all when they can. Less so, people aren't going to be buying shirts anymore. So they're basically looking at ways to transfer the income onto something else.
It's I'm a true believer that the worst things in life sometimes happen for, and they're the things that we learn the most from. I really hope that more and more especially with things like football, etc. I used to love the game, mate. I really did. I stopped watching it.
You're a Wolves fan, are you?
Well, I sort of am. I've always loved Wolves because I'm from Wolves, but historically I'm a Man United supporter because when I was 4 years old, my brother supported Liverpool and I hated him. And obviously, Man United hadn't won anything back then either when I was 4, because that's how long ago it was. So I just followed them all throughout my life. I supported Man United, but I always obviously had a soft spot for Wolves because, and I do go to the occasional game at Wolves. It's and they're a good team now.
Yeah, they're doing well, aren't they?
But even so, it's like they're not. There's only one player from Wolverhampton. I think the rest of the team are all from Portugal.
Yeah.
I don't begrudge those Portuguese players that, by the way. I just think, well, we need to get back to the grassroots of things, because I fell out of love again. I think because what I started to see it becoming was a bunch of millionaires falling over themselves and rolling about on the floor in order for billionaires to make them even more money. And I just stopped watching it. And honestly, I went through a period of watching women's football because I thought it was a purer version of the game.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that this is going to reverse things and say, no, hold on a minute, we're messed up here. We need to go back to, taking it back to the grassroots of things instead of, and actually thinking about not just a club in the way of, football as well as in a way of making money, but there's a way of actually, bringing community together and community spirit. You look at what Marcus Rashford is doing up there in Manchester. He's a shining light, isn't he? Yeah,
well, I mean, if you just look over to Ireland and the way that they use their national sport to promote local communities. I mean, them players over there, they're real athletes, more so probably than half the footballers in the Premiership and the Premier League and the Championship. But they don't get paid. They're amateur athletes, so they don't get paid. You play for your club, your local club, and if you're good enough, you play for your local county. And yeah, I mean, half of them are just working on the side as butchers, teachers, doctors, whatever. And yeah, I mean, it's a much purer form of the sport, and it's a way of just continuing and perpetuating the national culture as well. And I think that's the way sport should be played, really. And I mean, it works. It works, and a lot of the money that goes into the GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association, that's pumped back into the community, so they have resources for training, so they can go on trips or whatever. And that, I mean, I can't see that happening with football, to be honest. I mean, there's so much money in it now that it looks like there's little way to turn back. But that is a model for how a sport can function to the benefit of the community and in a kind of purer form, as you say.
Yeah, I really do. I think we messed up with football. I think there's too much money involved. I really do. I now sound like a grumpy old man. I know that there's too much money involved in football these days. It wasn't like that. £10 you can get a bag of chips on the way home after seeing a match. But I just think we should go that way. It's something that really interested me this morning. I wanted to speak to you though about Venezuela, because you went to Venezuela, didn't you? Was it 2 years ago you went?
I went. It was it was about a month. It was about 16 months ago. So it was about 2 months after the kind of coup attempt began in late January 2019.
All right. So if this is going to be a standalone podcast, obviously I've spoke to you before and we've documented this, but if this is going to stand alone, we need to obviously premise what has happened up until this point in Venezuela. Now, what I'm going to do, therefore, is I'm going to say what our media and the BBC and what have you want you to believe about Venezuela. And then if you don't mind, John, you're going to put us straight. Okay.
Yeah,
so
sure, yeah.
what we're led to believe is the elections in Venezuela are all rigged. And the socialist Maduro, just the same as the socialist Chavez before him, he wins the elections by landslides because they're all rigged, and that's it. That's the way he gets into power. It's not because they're popular and they have popular programs that help the people. And no, so we don't think that he's president. So us and America, when I say us, I mean America with us on the coattails. Well, we've decided that Maduro's not president. And we've decided, along with 6 or 7 other countries, I think it was, that no, he's not president. We've decided that somebody called Juan Guaido is president, even though only 18% of the Venezuelans had heard of him. And he's very suspiciously got lots of suspicious ties to the CIA and American business interests. That's what we're led to believe. And Maduro refused to give up his position as leader, as dictator rather, of Venezuela. So we had in the Bank of England 1.8 billion pounds worth of gold, Venezuelan gold, that we were holding for them, and they asked for it back, and we said no.
Yeah,
that's what we're led to believe, mate. What's actually happened?
Well, I mean, what you're seeing in the news at the moment, that Maduro is this kind of dictatorial, autocratic, ruthless, and stupid, is another narrative that you found in the media when they talk about his bus driver past, etc. So this narrative, it's not new. I mean, this has been going on for a very long time. This has been going on from pretty much the day that Chavez was elected. The Western media has pretty much claimed in 1998.
And
in 1998,
we're just so I'm just putting this out there. When did they find all those 397 billion barrels of oil? Around 2001.
Yeah, well, I mean, Venezuela is long known that it's been sat on a quite incredible amount of oil.
Yeah, more than
the
Saudi
problem
Arabia.
is, yeah, well, it's got the largest proven oil reserves in the world. I mean, one of the problems is it's very heavy crude oil, so they need a lot of things imported in order to refine it, which is, we'll get to that afterwards.
They can refine it in Texas, though, can't they, mate?
They can, yeah, and they had been.
That's where they refine the tar sands.
Yeah, so they had been refining it in Texas.
I'm not saying anything, I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah. So I mean, he's elected in 1998. Within 4 years, you have all of these various US agencies, USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, NDI, and all this army of acronyms, as Matt Kennard calls them, that are all funding supposedly civil society groups throughout Venezuela. And if you look on their website, it's just pure corporate speak. We're interested in promoting democratic and liberal values in the country. But what's really going on is they were working to undermine the democratically elected government. So in 2002, you have the first major coup attempt. The BBC described it as a new wave of democracy in Venezuela. And I believe The Guardian was quite supportive of it as well. Within 3 days, the people had actually gone out onto the streets to demand that Hugo Chavez was put back into power. So the people actually overturned the first coup attempt. Shortly after, it became known that the CIA was heavily involved in this coup attempt as well, which at the time, of course, all of the main Western columnists would say, look, it's very easy to just blame the CIA for everything bad that happened in Latin America. However, this time it's different. And, you have this wave called every single coup in Latin America. It happened in Bolivia recently as well. The left is always quick to jump to say that the CIA or the US's hand is the one meddling behind affairs in Latin America. And what you're actually doing, you anti-imperialists, is you are removing the agency of Latin Americans. And of course, that's not to say that people in Latin America, certain socioeconomic interests are not also involved in these coup attempts. Of course they are. However, I think we have a duty to criticise and condemn our own government's involvements in the destabilisation of governments abroad. And of course, that is what the left is doing. However, just to continue, so 2002, you have the first coup attempt. Chavez is brought back. After that, he gets a bit more radical with his economic policy. So within a few years,
he says he was kidnapped, didn't he? Chavez.
He was effectively kidnapped. It was quite similar to Aristide in Haiti when they basically bundled him onto a plane and took him away. So he was taken by some of the military command. He was brought to a prison. And one of Juan Guaido's UK ambassadors, I forget his name now, but Juan Guaido's ambassador to Germany was actually one of the military guards that held Chavez in the days, and he wrote a book about it, basically really trying to humiliate Chavez, saying, I think the title of his book was "I Saw Chavez Cry" or something like that. So so you've got this continuity between the coup, the ongoing coup attempts at the moment, and all the way back to 2002, not just with the US, but some of the figures within Venezuela, and of course Leopoldo Lopez was hanging around back in those days as well. One of the founding members of Voluntad Popular, Popular Will, the party of Juan Guaido, well, the former party of Juan Guaido, but we'll get onto that as well. So I mean, during the 2000s, Chavez starts to enact all of these quite radical socio-economic reforms, nationalises the oil, and of course you've got a commodities boom that's going on at this time as well. So the oil price is extremely high, and he's reinvesting that into Venezuelan society.
Yeah, in 1999, they implemented a totally new constitution as well. They call it the Bolivarian Constitution, don't they? And they instituted all sorts of ways to democratize the country and try and make it so everybody actually had a hand in things.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, and all of these fundamental changes of Venezuelan society that Chavez enacted, they were all voted on. So there was a referendum on replacing the constitution. I mean, Chavez even had a referendum to get rid of himself, even though he had a democratic mandate to remain for 5 years.
What about these votes, though, John? Are these votes? You've been over there, you've seen them. You know, what about the elections? Are they free and fair over there? Because we keep getting told that they're not.
Well, I mean,
you can come back to that if you want. If you can circle back to it if you want. It's just.
I believe it was in 2013 that Jimmy Carter, the former US president, visited Venezuela, and he said they were the most freest and fairest elections that he'd ever witnessed in the country. Obviously, that was
US
before,
president.
That's a former US president. That was obviously before the 2018 presidential election that is in question. That all of, as always, as has consistently occurred, despite all evidence, for the past 2 decades, all of the Western media, the US government, the British government, has said that there are concerns about these elections. However, 4 different international monitoring groups monitored the 2018 presidential election. All of them found it to be free and fair. And I mean, I just think it's a perfect example just to look to Bolivia at the moment, and you look at what happens when you take the Western powers' word for it and organise supposedly neutral organisations that are funded by the Western powers, like the Organisation of American States, when they proclaim shortly after an election and try and set the narrative that the election was fraudulent. And what actually happens? Well, you get a right-wing coup, a quasi-fascist coup, as was in Bolivia, that has absolutely no popular support whatsoever, has been totally hostile to actually holding elections, whereas it was supposedly a coup in the name of democracy. And lo and behold, shortly afterwards, I mean, we knew at CEPR within days that the OAS's review of the election was fraudulent itself. Yeah. But then sooner or later you get outlets like the Washington Post, the New York Times, that kind of subtly admit, oh, maybe we were wrong again about this one. I mean, the New York Times hasn't seen a coup they didn't like for the past 50 years. Yeah. So
Chavez, he implements all these reforms, doesn't he, in the country, and what sort of effect does that have on the country and the people itself?
Well, quite a profound effect. All kind of socioeconomic metrics of progress improved. I mean, illiteracy was more or less diminished. Adult education increased, infant mortality decreased, the poverty level massively decreased from something like 52% to within the 20s. So we over halved poverty, extreme poverty massively diminished, homelessness almost totally diminished. I believe the Chavez and Maduro governments have built over 3 million houses, social housing projects, since 1998. Hunger decreased, etc., etc. So all of the kind of metrics of social progress. I mean, universities were made free. There was adult education facilities, community education facilities, kind of in the model of Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educationist. So you have all of these metrics of social progress that happened, and that was basically unpalatable for the US.
So it stands to reason then that Chavez is going to have a lot of support, especially from indigenous people in Venezuela that he sort of brought into to democracy. And I'm not sure whether it was you or Ben Norton or maybe even both of you that explained to me in the past that how racist the West's view of this is, because the people that they are basically dismissing as their vote doesn't count are the indigenous, the black and the brown people in sort of like the what they call them, the barrios, they call them, don't they, or something like that in Venezuela?
Yeah. So I mean, you still get this kind of imagery when the Western media talks about supporters of Chavismo. So, for example, NPR, I remember shortly, I believe this was in late 2019, shortly after the coups, their journalist went into the barrios and said something like, "And I had to plunge into the depths of Chavismo." And you know, it's as if you're sinking into this kind of hellish hole when you go out into the poor areas outside of the main.
I had to go and walk out there with the great unwashed. Exactly,
yeah. So, but it's the same with most Western journalists that go out there. They stay in the rich part of Caracas in the east.
You didn't, did you?
And they don't. No, I was staying in the west. I was actually staying with a family. The dad ran a colectivo, a collective, a social organisation that helped out children in the area. So it was quite a different experience.
So is that like the dad running that sort of thing? Sorry to cut you off. Is that you know, a regular thing, or is it just you know, did they send you to that one guy and he's the only guy in Venezuela who does it, or was that widespread?
So I mean even before the election of Chavez, there was a lot of social organisation in the poor areas in Venezuela. However, during the first, say, decade of Chavez, up until he died in 2013, these colectivos, these kind of local social organisations, which are for the most part basic social organisations that you could imagine in the West, although on a lesser scale. So church groups, helping kids do cultural activities like art and things like that. There are some armed collectivos, which are basically the only ones that are ever displayed in the media in the West. So all of these social organisations, which are actually fundamental to the kind of cultural fabric, not only of Venezuela, but of the political culture that supports the Chavismo, is basically represented as a terrorist movement. Whereas like actually on the ground, it's basically grassroots social organisation. And
it's like Jeremy Corbyn's wet dream, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine something similar like that happening here if Corbyn were to have been elected. I mean, Momentum could be described as a colectivo, basically a politically interested social group that is involved in both campaigning, but also various other cultural activities and educational activities as well. However, across the West, these social organisations have been presented as terrorist groups, as armed radicals, etc., etc. And that's simply
more likely to be some family of, you know, Venezuelans who are just trying to teach kids how to read.
Basically, yeah.
I should say I'm surprised, but you know, I'm not. I really am not. I've been covering this, but it amazes me, John, that they're just carrying on with this narrative, aren't they? Even though, like, you know, we've got the proof now, we've got countering evidence that they've been lying to us all along. that they still go along with it as if it's the truth just because they keep telling the lie. And then they tell us, why is nobody obeying our rules on COVID? Why does nobody believe us on COVID? Well, it's because you've been lying to us for the last 20 years about countries like Venezuela.
Yeah, I mean, there is a massive problem with the total dissolution of trust in politics. And I think a large part of that is to do with foreign policy. I mean, the Iraq War was one of the biggest lies of the past century. The public was hoodwinked into. It was on. I mean, but it also works across the media as well. I mean, you had on the front page of, I think, the Daily Star that we were 40 minutes away from being nuked by Iraq.
I remember that.
And all these
40 minutes.
Oh yeah, I think I was too young, fortunately, but I've seen the headlines. So yeah, I mean, so there is a massive problem with the dissolution of trust in public institutions like government, like the media. And that does, I mean, Jonathan Cook wrote a great article about this, and that kind of leads to a total rejection of all public institutions. So public messaging on coronavirus is taken as nonsense. It kind of leads to a total rejection, which at times is, in my opinion, not necessarily accurate. It's good to be cynical about power, and it's good to be critical about power, but I don't think it's right to be universally cynical about every single thing.
You say that, but my jumping off point with the government is the George Carlin jumping off point. I immediately think that they're lying, and then check things to find out, oh no, it turns out that they are telling the truth on this occasion. But most of the time they're lying. Most of the time, on most of reports that I hear, this sort of, I don't know when it was, there was an awakening I had. It was around about the 2016 election, and I saw CNN just go from one side of the story to the next in 24 hours and to do a total pivot on something. And at that point, I thought, okay, something's seriously broken here. And that's when I sort of delved in and tried to look at. And what I found was they were just lying all the time. My fiance has a story of how her awakening was a story that she saw on a news report on a foreign TV channel, on an Eastern European, I think it was TV channel. She saw a report on, and it was to do with an Israeli raid on a Palestinian village that had killed, they'd fired a rocket and had killed some Palestinians. And then the next, I think the week or two later, there was a report on the BBC that there was this terrorist Palestinian who came from this village. And they never said, oh, the reason why he did this terrorist act is because, Israel basically killed his entire family 10 days previous. But they never mentioned that part of the story. And that was sort of her awakening years ago as to, oh, they're lying to us. They're not just, this isn't just bad reporting. This is actual lying out loud to us with a straight face, proper lying liars.
Yeah.
And I think more and more people are realizing this, and you cannot blame these people who are in the streets going, David Icke says, this, that, and the other, because, well, the people who have meant to be telling them the truth all along have been lying to them systematically their entire lives. It's the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course, Pete. You can have a certain sympathy for people that become totally cynical.
I do.
With the government. I wouldn't say you'd therefore jump to the words of David Icke, but
I'm not going to call them idiots. I'm not going to do that. They're not. As far as I'm concerned, they have been, they're right not to trust their government. I saw a video of the actual army on the street yesterday in Birmingham. Yeah. The army going on up to doors. It was really, I tweeted it out. Did you see it? There's the army on the street. They were wearing camouflage with high-vis jackets on, John.
Right. Well,
like, do you want to be seen or not? And they were knocking on doors with and they were saying that they were giving free COVID tests, and somebody filmed them and they were asking them questions. Hold on a minute. Why are you knocking on doors? Are they going on a list if people are saying no? And instead of answering, you know what they did? They said, we're not answering any more questions, and then got in the cars and drove away.
Good deal.
So you can understand the people on the ground are like, no, you're lying to us here. And you can understand they're going to get a lot of pushback. There's only one way that they're going to actually get the mass of people, I think, under control with this, and that's to just come clean and say, okay, we've been lying to you about this, this, and this. Let's tell you the truth now.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two separate issues here. Firstly, because a government will use any crisis or will exploit any crisis to its benefit, does not negate the existence of the original crisis, and that's what a lot of people are getting confused by.
Correct.
So people are assuming just because the government will try and exploit this coronavirus crisis in order to totally diminish our civil liberties, etc., that means that the coronavirus in and of itself is a conspiracy. I think that's a step way too far. And I think it's born of a total distrust in government institutions, which I would sympathise with. However, I don't think that's a correct analysis. At the same time, there are obvious issues with what's going on at the moment. Big Brother Watch has been doing a lot of good work about how legislation has just been rushed through Parliament at the moment. We've seen, I mean, not over with the overseas operations bill. We've also seen it in terms of coronavirus legislation.
You mean the veterans bill, mate? It wasn't the overseas. You mean the veteran? Oh no, that was a different one, wasn't it? Sorry.
It was a separate one, I believe. Yeah.
It was the veterans.
So the overseas operations bill was basically limiting the period during which you can be prosecuted for war crimes, including torture,
to the last 5 years, wasn't it?
Making it incredibly difficult for the armed personnel to end up being prosecuted for committing war crimes, which is pretty. And I mean, I forget the name of the more recent bill that Labour once again abstained on, and
the Veterans Bill. They called it the Veterans Bill. You know how they call it the Patriot Act? It's the Veterans Bill that they called. That's what they called the bill that was to stop the prosecution of like spies for war crimes, etc., in the Iraq War, and Labour abstained from that one. I'm not sure whether that's the one that you were talking about, but in the media they called it the Veterans Bill. So you can see they're invoking an emotion there just by calling it that. You know how they call the Patriot Act, etc., etc. It's just it's so insidious the way they're calling things that we can't. So basically, what that bill meant, John, correct me if I'm wrong, that if we find out that somebody did a heinous war crime in Iraq or Afghanistan longer than 5 years ago, they cannot be prosecuted. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I mean,
and
even
Labour
the armed
fell
services,
over and
even the
we can't vote
main,
on this one.
Yeah, leading voice in the armed services didn't even want this to be the case because they're not protected. If there's a kind of culture of unaccountability in the armed services when it comes to these kind of issues, then that leads to a lot of problems for the armed services themselves. And of course, a lot of people in the armed services don't actually want to be involved in war crimes.
Of course not.
Obviously. So I mean, this is actually universally unpopular. Apart from with war criminals.
It's not the banks. You bailed out the banks in 2008, and what happened? Well, look where we are. The banks have got bigger, and they're doing it again. They've got all this money, and they're going and getting thanks for the money, buying back their stock again. This is not rocket science. If there is no repercussions for people's bad actions, they're going to do it again. And it's going to happen again, isn't it? If we don't prosecute war criminals, there are going to be more war criminals. This is simple. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and just to go back to what you were saying about the Patriot Act and the Veterans Bill, I mean, this also carries over to all propaganda within the corporate media. I mean, the way they use language at the moment is so sophisticated
the tear gas isn't tear gas anymore. It's mold irritants.
Yeah, but even the choice of adjectives, for example, I mean, you do psychological studies. If you say you get participants to watch, say, a car hitting a tree, all at the same video, you ask how fast was the car going when it hit the tree, how fast was the car going when it smashed the tree, how fast was the car going when it walloped the tree. And so the harder the adjective, the more the faster the participants will assume the car was going. And this kind of carries on into police brutality cases and murdering. So I mean, let's take an example of the Associated Press recently, and the passive voice is always used when Israel kills someone. And so an Israeli sniper actually shot an Associated Press journalist Um, and the Associated Press reported on it. Associated Press was shot while covering I don't know, issue in Palestine, and so the passive voice was used to obviously replace the actual perpetrator of this violence. When
So
it was the Associated Press covering a story of their own bloody journalist being shot. So you get the kind of idea of how certain sentence formulations and certain use of language is used to create an image that is very, very much more subtle and under the surface than would appear to meet the eye when you're reading it. And, you know, and that's how subtle biases are informed. And that's how we end up in a situation where there's a constant shadow of US and British violence that nobody ever really talks about.
Yeah.
I mean, the war in Yemen at the moment is a case in point. It's a total absurdity that isn't a main public issue, a relentless public issue that all of the main media is covering. I mean, they're on the precipice of 5 million people dying due to a famine that's been induced by this horrific war by Saudi Arabia, sponsored by and Declassified UK have done great work on the ways in which the British government is sponsoring this war.
Yemen, just to bring up your point on Yemen, I've covered Yemen, and what's happening is insane. For those people who don't know, we're basically involved in a proxy war in Yemen. Saudi Arabia, they want to install their dictator in Yemen. Basically, that's what it comes down to. They had, they had an ousting. They had in Yemen during the so-called Arab Spring, I think in 2012. They ousted their leader. There was an assassination when he went to hide out in Saudi Arabia, one of them, and it was basically a rising up of people that was hijacked by Western governments and other interests, etc., which happens all the time. But the country has basically been in turmoil ever since, and our solution is to arm and sell weapons and planes to Saudi Arabia for them to bomb the shit out of the poorest country in the Middle East. And we not only do that, we not only profit from the arms sales, we train the pilots, we give them the ordnance, etc. We give them all the the intelligence, etc., etc. We basically do everything apart from fly over it and pull the fucking button, And this is,
and
26 million
British
people.
And RAF personnel are actually in the control rooms with Saudi air officers.
We're doing everything,
so we don't quite press the button, but they're in the same room as the button.
We've got our finger on their finger on the trigger.
Effectively, yeah. And I mean, without our finger on their finger would barely be able to function. That's a really crucial point.
That is the thing. If we said no, we're not supporting this war, they couldn't have their war. They literally couldn't do it without US, UK support. They could not do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's significantly an air war.
26 million people, 13 million are starving. And how many have been displaced? Was it 4 million I heard had been displaced? And then there's an outbreak, the largest outbreak of cholera ever in this country as a result of the drinking water facilities being so downgraded, etc., because of this war. And then what does Saudi Arabia do? They bomb the fucking water towers and then the cholera treatment centers as well. And they bomb them on purpose. This is Red Cross, Red Crescent, stamped stuff, and they bomb them on purpose to cause suffering, and we are right behind them 100%.
Yeah, I mean, purposefully bombing civilian infrastructure is one of the most clearest examples of a war crime that you can get, and that our government is so heavily implicated in this, and so it receives so little coverage, and the scale of suffering that this is causing. I mean, every metric of horror is present here.
It's vile.
And it's an absolute.
I can't even watch the videos of it, mate. It's vile. It's horrific, horrific. It really is. Sorry, we were talking. Do you want to circle back to Venezuela? We were on Venezuela, weren't we? Where did we get to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, where
Chavez. So Chavez implements all these things, and the illiteracy, etc. That gets better. Now he dies, then, doesn't he?
Yeah, in 2013.
And then Maduro is his successor. Did he have an election, Maduro, when he came in, or did he just come in like in Yemen, where they just install their next guy?
No, not he didn't. He didn't have an election immediately. No, but I mean that's fairly normal for any democratic country.
He had one within 12 months there.
Yeah, and I mean it was similar to when JFK was shot, for
Yeah.
example. Lyndon Johnson came in. Yeah, so it's I mean
Yeah,
a lot of the things that happen in Venezuela, for instance, say the government putting in allies in the Supreme Court, that would be called packing the court. But then it happens in the US all the time.
Yeah.
They just like
The
Brett
Democrats are
Kavanaugh, for
talking about doing
example.
it now, aren't they?
So they're packing the court with alleged rapists. So I mean, the US, everything that the US accuses Venezuela of doing in democratic terms, it is either equally or more guilty of. So I mean, it's you have to take these things together.
Yeah, there's still. It's not like there's not corruption in Venezuela. Of course, there's corruption in Venezuela.
Yeah, I mean, of course there's. But we're also talking about there's kind of two forms of corruption, really. There's one where I mean, you look at, let's say, like some poor African country whose leader pockets £300 million and basically deprives the population. You look on this, that's awful corruption. These individual cases of quite obvious corruption, explicit corruption. But then you've got the kind of structural corruption that the US and especially Britain allows to happen all of the time, and that is way more damaging to especially countries in the global south, but the global economy in general. I mean, just last year, I believe it's called Transparency Index, found that the UK was the main facilitator of global tax havens through the Cayman Islands and various other places. And the amount of money that is being siphoned out of the global economy for UK associated tax havens is absolutely incredible. But this is not explicit corruption. I mean, and a second form of corruption is simply overthrowing foreign governments that do not toe the line to what the US and Britain expect of a foreign country, i.e., opening up their natural resources to private investment, etc., and voting their way on the UN Security Council and all these various things. So they're two forms of structural corruption that are far more damaging than when you look at, say, individual cases of corruption, Venezuela or any country in the global south. And obviously the former is prioritised.
Well. There's also stupidity as well. They really over-relied on their oil production as they really over-relied on it. And that led them wide open, if I remember right, to the Americans getting the Saudi Arabians to overproduce oil, which made the Venezuelan oil incompetitive on the world market and obviously drove their economy down. It's horrific. Ben Norton was explaining it to me. I remember looking at him and thinking, they did that. It's like they got Saudi Arabia to overproduce oil for a long time to drive the price of oil down in order to make the Venezuelan oil uncompetitive on the global scale, which obviously helped kill their economy as well. It's horrible what they did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Venezuela's economy for a long time has been overly reliant on oil. It's really difficult when you get a socialist government in power. You can either play the long game, which is quite risky, and try and totally reformulate your domestic economy, and that's to a certain degree what Ecuador did under Correa. Or you can try and kind of rush through major socioeconomic reforms that have been totally lacking in the country for so long. So so Chomsky's position on Venezuela was basically that the government was inexperienced. They didn't adequately diversify their economy, became over-reliant on oil, and therefore over-reliant on global processes on which they had no control, and therefore vulnerable to what actually in the end happened with the collapse of the commodities boom. However, there's a good article by someone called Stephen Elner, I believe he's a professor. He focuses a lot on Venezuela. He basically says that this expectation to totally diversify your economy in such a short amount of time, while you're under imperialist attack, is basically, you're setting expectations of the left in the global south that you would not set for governments in the global north. Governments in the global north that are never under the same kind of pressures of domestic attack funded by foreign governments. As countries in the global south. So I sympathise with both sides of the argument. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, their failure to diversify from oil was a major letdown, and it to a certain degree contributes to the economic crisis that's going on at the moment. However, I think we should be careful about setting expectations too high, or these kind of exotic expectations for the left in the global south, because they operate under completely different circumstances than we do.
It's not like they were Saudi Arabia though and just kept all the profits for themselves. They obviously, they developed massive programs in Venezuela. Was it the SNAP program? I seem to remember. What was that food program that they launched?
The CLAP.
CLAP. America sanctioned that program, didn't they? This is a food program for the poor in Venezuela, and America sanctioned it.
Yeah, so I mean, something like 6 million Venezuelan families, a large percentage of the population, are reliant on these bi-weekly food boxes that are distributed throughout the country. And yeah, I mean,
rice, potatoes.
Yeah, I mean, of course, all basic staples. I mean, I was involved in the distribution process one day of CLAP. I went out when the community organised took the survey, and then I was there when they actually distributed it.
Talk me through sort of what area was this CLAP program? How does it work?
Well, it's basically it's distributed by parroquia, parish areas, and local community organisers will go around and take a census and basically ask what people need, what's required, how many people live in the house, how often they need the CLAP, if they need it delivered, if they need to, what their ages are, what their names are, etc. So they do basically quite a limited census to see who in the area needs it, and then they can tell them where they need to go and on what day to receive the CLAP. And so I believe it was a Thursday, the day that I was there, and so they go, they check the census, they tick their name, they receive the box. The box is usually, I forget how many, I believe it's about 10 kilos worth of food. You've got just dry staples, rice, beans, pasta, etc., etc. And so so I mean, this is really a crucial lifeline for a lot of Venezuelan families, given the extent of the economic crisis at the moment. When I was there, the minimum monthly wage had gone down to as much as about $7. So a lot, which is an incredibly small amount of money. However, a lot, there's a lot of people living in social housing, and they get food from the government. So a lot of the basic costs of life are actually removed by social programs, which of course is not ideal. However, the government is providing for a lot of the population to weather this storm. So what's happening? So this CLAP program is providing food for about 6 million families in Venezuela, and the US government, who otherwise are quite implicitly trying to starve the population of Venezuela to the degree that they overthrow their own government. Now, when they're sanctioning the CLAP, this becomes quite explicit. It kind of erodes the facade of any care for the well-being of the Venezuelan population. And so I mean, for the past, I believe, 2 years, the US government has been quite extravagantly sanctioning this program.
Tell me about the gold, mate. This is what you hear, because this is the new news, isn't it? Because they asked for the gold back, didn't they? And this gold was actually, it was mined in Venezuela, wasn't it? It's actually Venezuelan gold.
I'm actually not sure about where it was mined in Venezuela. Right.
Mined in Venezuela. It's actual Venezuelan gold. It's not just theirs, it's theirs.
Bloody hell. So obviously, Venezuela, as every other country, apart from a lot of countries in Asia, in fact, has been suffering the consequences of the coronavirus. So in July, earlier this year, it requested access to this roughly $2 billion worth of gold that's being held in the Bank of England in order to, they wanted to siphon the money through
What's
through
that
the
in
UN.
pounds? About £7.50? Something like that.
Yeah, something
about
like that.
2 billion of gold.
I think it's about 1.5 billion pounds worth.
Yeah,
now,
something like that.
Devalued. So they requested access to this gold in order to fund medical requirements in response to the coronavirus pandemic, and to siphon the money through the UN so that the way it was being used was being monitored, etc. And the Bank of England basically refused. And so the Maduro government took the Bank of England to court to basically say this is rightfully our gold. So in July, the UK High Court had a hearing on who effectively owns this Venezuelan gold. And in the first hearing, the court basically ruled that because the government recognises Juan Guaidó, the judiciary also has to recognise Juan Guaidó because on this principle of one voice, wherein the executive and the judiciary has to have the same voice in terms of recognising states. So that was the first hearing. So they effectively gave the gold to Juan Guaidó. Juan Guaidó's UK representative, Vanessa Neumann, basically did this victory lap on Fox, CNN, wherever.
On the ground, they've got no support, have they, Guaido? In Venezuela, it's like literally no support. There's they managed to get a couple of army guys they managed to fool them into defecting, and then they realised, oh shit, there's only 20 of us, so they went straight back. There is literally no support when he turns up anywhere outside the rich, profitable areas. I mean, I've seen videos of people gathering around, kicking the shit out of his car, and then him having to reverse round and go backwards. They've got no support whatsoever. And this is the guy. This is the guy who we say is the real leader of Venezuela, and that's why we're withholding his gold.
Yeah. So yeah, he has very little support in Venezuela. I mean, as you said at the beginning of this video, when he first proclaimed himself president, less than 1 in 5 Venezuelans actually knew who he was.
I'm going to do.
I mean, more recently,
I'm going to go to the high street in Wolverhampton, declare myself mayor. See what happens.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. If there's a chance of you privatising Britain's oil, you might get a bit of backing from the US. Yeah, so I mean, a more recent poll, I believe, found that only 3% of Venezuelans actually think that Juan Guaidó is the legitimate president. But I mean, we're both talking about popular support and actual legitimacy at the moment. I mean, Maduro neither is very popular in Venezuela. Yeah. His popularity has been wavering around the 10 to 20% mark for the past couple of years. However, when we're talking about an issue of legitimacy. Well, exactly. I mean, Macron was down at 6% around the time when I went in February to cover the Gilets Jaunes.
Don't see us declaring Marine Le Pen the president of France, though, do we?
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I won't talk to the situation in Belarus at the moment, but that was effectively what Lukashenko said to Macron. He said, well, sort out your own problems before you start intervening in other people's
he was
politics.
over in Lebanon. Macron was over in Lebanon saying, the Lebanese government really need to sort their act together. Dude, the yellow vests they are 2 seconds away from breaking down the halls of Notre Dame. For Christ's sake, look at you, sort out your own shit, mate. But he's a little Napoleon, isn't he? He thinks he's going to colonise Africa again, and he's going to have all their minerals and whatever to build his economy. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So getting back to the Bank of England. So no, it's all good. I've enjoyed the pivots. But yeah, so the UK High Court basically rules that, along with this one voice principle that I believe has been in UK common law since the 1980s, that they have to recognise Juan Guaidó. However, when it goes to the Court of Appeal, which it did, I believe, just a week ago,
right?
The Court of Appeal basically said, well, does the UK government unequivocally recognise Juan Guaidó? And the answer is simply no, it doesn't. The Foreign Office has said in writing that it recognises Juan Guaidó as he ought to be the president of Venezuela,
right,
in the opinion of the UK Foreign Office. However, does the UK Foreign Office act as if he, in effect, is the president of Venezuela? And the answer is no. I mean, the UK Foreign Office, for instance, has to apply to the Venezuelan embassy to get access to the country if it ever wants to visit. Or if the Venezuela Reconstruction Unit head, John Saville, wants to visit without actually declaring that he is the head of the Venezuela Reconstruction Unit, as they did earlier this year, I believe in February. I mean, the Venezuelan government retains an ambassador that is recognised in this country.
Do we do
the
anything
universities.
different? Do
Um,
we act in any way different? Is that why that they've ruled against it here? Because we just act as if Venezuela, as if Maduro is president, apart from the Foreign Office saying no, Guaido is.
Effectively, the position of the UK government is Juan Guaido ought to be the president. However, he exercises virtually zero power in the country,
Right.
so we cannot act. So we cannot act as if he is the legitimate president.
Okay.
And it's the same with Juan Guaido's UK representative, Vanessa Neumann, who likes to call herself an ambassador in the UK. However, she's never been granted actual, and this is in the court documents as well. So she's never been granted legitimate diplomatic status in the UK. She's basically a civilian who just knows a lot of high-end UK government officials and has been lobbying for the overthrow of of the Venezuelan government. Let's bear in mind she hasn't lived as far as I'm aware in Venezuela since the age of 10. So she's basically this former corporate oil lobbyist, and she's kind of shifted through a number of think tanks, corporate think tanks, and she's turned up in the UK, and she's basically just lobbying the UK government to help overthrow the Venezuelan government. I mean, it's such an absurd state of affairs.
I'm trying to look up what I've got on this because it rings a bell. Something to do with her family and her father and what I don't know.
Yeah, so her granddad, someone called Hans Neumann, he was one of the kind of main businessmen. I mean, Ben Norton wrote a really excellent article about.
I think that's who told me about her.
About a kind of oligarchical family past. Yeah, so he so he was one of the most prominent businessmen in Venezuela, I believe, during the 60s and 70s. He had a lot of links with government in that time. I found in WikiLeaks documents that he was arranging to help diplomatic meetings between the US government and the Venezuelan government at the time.
Oh, really?
I mean, he was incredibly rich. I mean, he became the owner of the Mustique company, which owns the island of Mustique, wherein Vanessa Neumann and Mick Jagger used to holiday together.
Yeah,
She used to go out with Mick Jagger, where she called herself somehow unironically the cracker from Caracas. Actually, this is something I wouldn't mind speaking about. More recently, she tweeted from her Twitter account, "Muerte a Maduro," death to Maduro.
Really?
So I saw that soon enough. I don't know if you saw any of this. It was
I didn't.
Anyway, so I saw this. I screenshotted it and reposted it before she had a chance to. Before she had a chance to. She hasn't been banned, no. So she immediately claimed that she had been hacked, that it wasn't her.
Who told her to do that? Joy Reid?
Who knows?
Your blog was hacked. Yeah, time-traveling hackers did it. Oh.
Right, it gets worse, Gordon. I don't believe you followed this.
I haven't, mate. Go on, tell me about it.
So I shared this screenshot and basically said, is this the way a supposed diplomat should be asking? Asked Duncan Hill, the UK charge d'affaires in Venezuela. And so Vanessa Neumann, so she claims she was hacked. It's neither here nor there at this point.
Russia did it.
So the next morning after sharing this, I mean, it got a fair amount of shares. So next morning I wake up with these wild tweets directed both at me, at Pablo Navarrete, another journalist, and a Venezuela analysis, as well as Camila from Telesur, Camila Escalante. So I wake up from these tweets from Vanessa Neumann's company account called Asymmetrica, saying that we have a price on our head, that there's an FBI investigation being launched into us. She didn't actually explain what the accusation was, but these wild threats. So I wake up and I'm looking at my phone and it's like Asymmetrica, or when you're part of an international criminal conspiracy with a price on your head. And I was like, what the fuck? So I responded. I said, well, what's the accusation of criminal wrongdoing? She said, for hacking my account. So she said that me as well as the few others that are named, in cahoots with the Venezuelan government, supposedly hacked her account in order to tweet death to Maduro. I mean, this shit, it was simply batshit. So
yeah, That's what I'm going to use my hacking skills to do. I'm a journalist from Solihull, but that's what I'm going to use I'm a hacker on the side. I hack people's accounts to say, get to Maduro.
From Birmingham. But yeah,
Sorry.
but yeah, exactly. No, it's all good. No, I don't want to be associated with Solihull. That's
Good on you.
All
right,
they're a bit posh down there.
I don't know why I said that.
No, I'm joking. Yeah. So anyway, so this kind of just this kind of wild situation where I've got the Juan Guaido's UK representative. Effectively
they said
sending a
you were
death
subject
threat.
of an FBI investigation.
Yeah, apparently so. And it was the whole thing was just kind of crazy. But I mean, this company Asymmetrica as well is quite funny as well. I mean, there are many parts of the Venezuelan opposition which, the backdrop of quite a tragic situation in the country. The Venezuelan opposition are often so incompetent to the point of tragicomic. So Asymmetrica is this company that Vanessa Neumann runs. It's supposedly a strategic communications firm, but it has no functioning contact details on the actual website. The email that they provide you with is a dud. It doesn't work. So this strategic communications firm has no functioning contact details on its website. If you look up, I mean, back in, I believe, 2015, on corporate listings in the US, it was listed co-directors were two ex-CIA members. So one of them was actually instrumental in developing Washington's drone warfare program. So you've got this kind of shady business, and now what they're up to.
Come on, John, we're conspiracy theories if we start saying that, aren't we? If we start linking there to the CIA, can you see?
She is linked to the. This isn't even a conspiracy. I'm not making any assumptions here. I'm just stating basic facts.
But this is what they're going to label you as, mate. They're going to call you a conspiracy theorist for bringing up the CIA and Vanessa Neumann and Juan Guaido. That's what they've done with me. I'm a conspiracy theorist because I think he's a puppet of the CIA.
Well, I mean, that's virtually open knowledge. I mean, Mike. I mean, back here's another link. Back in 2018, Vanessa Neumann was at Aspen, this security conference, Aspen conference, with then head of the CIA, Mike Pompeo. And what did Vanessa Neumann say to Mike Pompeo, the head of the CIA? He said, "Oh, please, can you do something in my country?" And he said, "Don't worry, we're working on it." So back in 2018, you already have these links developing between Vanessa Neumann, Mike Pompeo, the CIA, Venezuela, etc., etc. I mean, it's I mean, it's so blatant. It would be laughable for anyone to even claim that this is conspiratorial. I mean, this is literally how the US foreign policy operates, and they've been open about it. I mean, John Bolton's been open about it as well.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, though, about nobody believing the media about COVID. Because I mean, I'm saying this, and we're talking to each other now about this Guaido and his links to CIA and Vanessa Neumann, etc. This is open knowledge. This is not like we're conspiracy stuff or whatever. There's documental evidence of it, but you listen to the media and you get a totally different version of events with regards to this, don't you? Totally different.
Yeah.
It's night and day. So they're lying, clearly.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely cases of just bad faith lying, but I think with a lot of the kind of Western media liberal class, I don't think they actually have any capacity for self-reflection on what their kind of role in apologising for UK and US foreign policy is. And of course, if they started to actually rebel against the kind of doctrines of what is permissible within UK media, they'd soon find themselves out of a job.
But
so I think there's kind of these,
they've done it before, and there were no repercussions. These people who were wrong. These are the same people now who are giving us the lies about this. Many of these people are the same people who told us that Saddam was 40 minutes away from killing us with weapons.
Oh yeah, no,
there was no repercussions. In fact, they got promotions. So why would they do anything different now if the last time they got promoted? It's
a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
And anyone who starts to rail against within the mainstream that starts to rail against these kind of orthodoxies of these kind of orthodox assumptions about how the UK and the US function in the world, I mean, Mark Curtis almost never gets a hearing in the mainstream media. Noam Chomsky rarely did. You had Jonathan Cook, who used to work for The Guardian, gone. Ian Cobain, one of the best investigative journalists in the UK, he used to work in The Guardian for about a year, gone. So, yeah, I mean, it's any kind of serious journalism is just being bled out of the mainstream. Because, I mean, even if you look back 20 years, because I often go through The Guardian archives, etc., just doing research for separate things, it's a lot more radical than it is today. I mean, it's
vanilla,
coverage
isn't it,
even.
now? It's so bland and
yeah.
It's not for
Yeah,
the working class person would not look at that and pick it up and read it on a daily basis. They just wouldn't. They just wouldn't. I mean, I don't know. I suppose they'd pick up the tabloids there, wouldn't they? They still sell them.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I want to ask
I mean,
you, John, this is the question I want to ask you. This is the big question. Do you think we've actually got the gold, or do you think we've sold it to cash4gold.com in an envelope to pay for the furlough scheme? It's a fair question.
Yeah.
Have we actually got it?
Well, it's kind of a tragic question, really, because at the moment now it's gone to the appeals court. It's going to go back to a commercial court, and that period is going to take some time. That judgment is going to take more time again. So this gold, whether they've sold, whatever the situation with the gold is, and I mean it's not going to get. All jokes aside, it's useless. It's effectively useless at the moment. It's sat where it's sat. It can't be used by Venezuela to respond to this, both the economic crisis and the health crisis that's going on at the moment. And ultimately, what's even worse is I'm fairly confident that although this was a major blow to the Venezuelan opposition, that it was rejected, that it was successfully appealed, I still believe that once it goes back to the commercial court, then they will rule that it does in fact belong to Juan Guaido. And then once it gets into his hands, what's it going to be used for? We don't know, but we can safely assume that a lot of the money that's been given to Juan Guaido up until now has not been used for benevolent means. And so the UK will effectively, and the UK judiciary will effectively become complicit, even more so than it already is in the coup.
Yeah, this is a common story, isn't it? The UK judiciary being involved in this, because you and I both are ardent supporters of Julian Assange. We've been following that as well, and you can see there's similarities here. You can see from as an onlooker, I can see what's going to happen with the Julian Assange thing. The fix is already in. They're going to do this in the lower court. They're going to say he's going to be extradited. There's going to be an appeal, then it's going to go to another, and it's all about just trying to extend it as long as possible and kick the can down the road as long as possible and frustrate and to keep things just nothing happening and to keep it all wrapped up in red tape. And this is what our court system basically does. There's no justice in the world anymore, not in this country, not for you or me, not for somebody who's got no money. There's only justice in this country if you've got money. And I really believe that.
On the Julian Assange point as well, it's also, and I think this is often missed, it is also fundamentally about justice for the people that are the victims of senseless, evil wars that are waged by the US and Britain abroad. People that, in Mark Curtis's word, are unpeople. They don't exist in the media. They don't exist in any national narratives. They don't exist in any. They don't even exist in war tallies. Death tallies. They just don't exist. These are unpeople. They get bombed. So the case of Julian Assange is really imperialism on trial as well. To what degree can we accept that we shouldn't know the truth about these horrific things that our governments are doing abroad? So that's another layer of injustice that is not actually captured within, not necessarily captured within the kind of jurisdiction of the hearing at the moment, but it is certainly important. Well, for me, probably the most important part. It's to what degree do these people, these unpeople, that are totally taken away from the narrative and diminished, deserve justice for themselves. And I mean, one of those people was heard inside the court, El Masri, who was kidnapped, renditioned to Afghanistan, tortured for months until they found out they had the wrong guy. Tortured him for another 4 months, forced food down his nose when he went on a hunger strike, and then in reverse renditioned him back to Albania. After he got off the flight, he assumed he'd be shot in the back of the head, totally disorientated, and then returned to Germany. He's been basically trying to piece his life together for the past decade or so to figure out what happened to him. And so his witness testimony was him basically saying WikiLeaks, through its released files on extraordinary rendition, helped me to piece my life back together.
Yeah.
There is a public interest here. This revealed major criminal wrongdoing by the CIA and by the US intelligence services. So I mean, yeah, you did get an element of the victims of US foreign policy present in the court. However, I think, yeah, that's the fundamental point.
I hope that they're going to get the gold back. I really do. I don't, but that's all it is. It's a hope. I'm hoping that there's going to be some sort of justice and they get it back, and you know they spend it on the clap program that's been sanctioned to oblivion by America. I really do feel for the people in that continent. And you know what, John, I don't think it's going to get any better as climate change and whatever happens. Especially as we transfer, you know, away from fossil fuels over to this green energy, etc. Because let's face it, the reason why they overthrew Bolivia that you mentioned there and Morales was the minerals. That's what we believe. That's what I truly believe as well. They only overthrow countries where they've got natural resources, don't they? And you know, I explained this to somebody the other day they were trying to say to me, you know, I was basically slagging off the Democrats and Biden, and they were like, "What you want Trump elected?" It's like, it's not about that. Don't you see? It doesn't matter who gets elected; it still carries on the way it is. They're two wings of the same bird. You know, you are essentially right now bombing 8 countries, sanctioning 38 more, have a military presence in basically every country in Africa, and are at war now with China in a trade war. That is basically 25% of the poorest people on the planet. You are killing for resources. And that's what it comes down to. And if we're moving on to green energy and we're going to need things like cobalt and lithium, etc., for batteries, blah, 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 then we're going to be getting them from these countries in South America that have already got those rare resources, like Bolivia, like Venezuela, etc., etc. Is this their future? It looks like it.
Yeah.
I know, it's horrible. It's a horrible thought, but
that's the issue. I mean, yeah. I mean, when you're talking about the US presidential election, I mean, you can take Chomsky's points and various other people's points to a degree that Joe Biden may do slightly more on climate breakdown, and he might, you know, distribute a slight amount more wealth. But a lot of anti-imperialists do find this kind of narrative hard to accept, because what you're implicitly doing is you're totally abandoning pretty much all of the global south, which will receive the same torture, the same bombing, the same coups that they would either under Trump. And I mean, oftentimes the Democrats are actually worse.
They're worse.
Than the
Obama
Republicans
went from two wars to 8. Saint Obama, Nobel Peace Prize, took them from 2 wars to 8.
But it's the same. It's the same in the UK as well. I mean, the Labour Party often has a much worse record than the Conservative Party. I mean, I revealed about a week or 2 weeks ago that the first Wilson government was complicit in destabilising Chile and trying to prevent the election twice of Salvador Allende, and then cooperated with the CIA once Allende was elected before the coup in 1973.
That revolution,
Chile,
I don't know much about it, mate. Maybe you can. That was horrific, wasn't it? The amount of people that was it Pinochet? Was that Pinochet? Allende?
Pinochet.
Am I right in thinking that? Is that correct?
You're right. Yeah.
How many people did he kill?
Well, I mean, the figures aren't especially clear still, but I believe a Truth Commission found it was something around 10,000. There was also mass torture. There was also forced disappearances. There was a major refugee crisis. A lot of people came to Britain. I mean, he remained in power until 1990, so it was a dictatorship for 17 years, supported immediately by the Edward Heath government. The Labour governments of Wilson and Callaghan were slightly more there's slightly more ethical foreign policy in the 70s, at least, rather than in contrast to the 60s.
But now, John, because we got involved back then, now Chile is peaceful and totally sorted, isn't it? It's a country that's on its feet and it's doing great. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to the present day is another situation. Sebastian Piñera, the Chilean president, is basically cracking down on protests in some of the most horrific ways. I believe something like 300 people lost eyes alone in November 2019. Just last week, the Chilean police pushed a young man off a bridge about 40 foot to his death in a river. It was really quite horrific. There's a video which I wouldn't really encourage you to watch because it's quite disturbing.
No, thanks.
And the British government once again is selling crowd control equipment to the Chilean government, which is presiding over these. And I'd be quite interested to see what they've sold to Bolivia under the Áñez government, because their defence spending has massively increased. However, I'm not sure the data is available at the moment, but it will be quite interesting to see in what ways the British government is in material terms supporting the Áñez coup regime in Bolivia.
I've seen the figures that I've seen the arms figures that they're selling to Saudi Arabia and Israel and the UAE. I've seen those figures, and they're off scale. So I'm expecting them to be going up and up and up with those countries. And this is what we're going to do now, is it? This is what our major export is going to be doing, is it? Arms sales. We used to export scientists and philosophers and writers and all these people. That's what we're going to export now. Bombs and weapons. Have you seen this riot shield that they're using in America with a stun thing on it? It looks like something out of electric Wonder Woman or something. It's incredible. Yeah. And this is what and obviously all these weapons get when we send them to places like Bolivia, these are where they get tested. They don't appear on the streets of Detroit and Parkland just, without getting tested. No, they get tested in places like Bolivia and Venezuela and Chile and Israel. That's where their testing grounds are. We saw a couple of years ago with the Great March of Return, where the drones were the ones who were firing the tear gas. Next thing you know, America doing it. They're doing the same thing. Mm. And so we got to be careful what we do and what we let our government do around the world, because eventually, and you only need to look at America right now, what's happening over there. Eventually, all of these tactics that they're doing around the world, they're going to use on us when the time comes. Yeah. And that's the thing that really bloody worries me.
Yeah, well, I mean, you saw in the early days of, there were a lot of pictures lining up the US police that were armed to the teeth. They looked like robots or something with huge riot shields next to a US hospital worker that needed PPI, and the same in Britain. And I mean, it kind of explains in a picture the primary function of a capitalist state. It's not to provide for the well-being of the general population. It's to maintain a certain stability for private capital interests. And it was so perfectly encapsulated in these photos. And it's even more terrifying when you take into account the kind of surveillance state at the moment as well. The way they've been surveilling the BLM protests over the past 6 months, how they've been intercepting whole swaths of mobile phone network data, how people's houses have been later raided the next day because they've basically just traced them home. So I mean, since the end of the Second World War, investment could have been made into public infrastructure services, and for a short time it was. But ever since the late 70s and 80s, we've basically seen a total divestment from public infrastructure and a crazy amount of just pointless, shameful investment in these surveillance competencies that don't help anyone. They don't help anyone.
What do you mean by that?
Just these wild techniques of surveillance. I mean, it's not just security cameras everywhere, but also everything that Snowden revealed in 2014 with the NSA files.
Yeah, and we've got
the data that's harvested through social media. Yeah.
So you carry
So
on.
it's just to conclude that point, it's just quite a shameful investment of human energy in
It really is.
general.
It's a shameful investment in because it's Stasi-like in the way it's being done as well, and the secrecy around it, and the way that we can't even find out what information that they've got on us. We can't find out anything that they do. It's under a veil of secrecy, and these, what worries me as well is the intertwinement with the Americans as well, and obviously they have a hand in all these Five Eyes facilities around the country. Obviously, RAF Croughton was one of them. We know about Harry Dunn getting killed outside there by one of their spies, and then her pissing off back to America and getting a promotion. When she got back there, he gave her a promotion, Trump did. So, it's everything's all one way. I can see it's all us giving in to the Americans' will, because let's face it, we're not withholding Venezuelans gold because we're wanting to withhold Venezuelans gold. We're withholding Venezuelans gold because the Americans want us to withhold the Venezuelan gold, just the same as the Americans were the ones who asked us to hijack those Iranian oil tankers and treat our Queen's Navy like pirates. It's America that we're doing these things for. It's not us, is it, John?
Yeah, well, I mean, even John Bolton wrote about that in his book. He said when he met Jeremy Hunt in 2019, when Jeremy Hunt was the UK Foreign Secretary, he said he basically asked him if the UK could freeze Venezuela's gold, and Jeremy Hunt responded that he would be delighted to do so. And this case around the Venezuelan gold is supposedly apolitical, we're led to believe. So yeah, I mean, it's the UK has almost totally sacrificed its political sovereignty to the goals of US foreign policy at this point. There's very little, I think, that the UK can do, and that's obviously proven in the Assange case, especially contrasted with the Harry Dunn case, and also UK foreign policy in Venezuela at the moment.
I hate to think what the rest of the world thinks of us. I really do. I hate to think it. I mean, I often think whether an average American realizes what the rest of the world thinks about their country, not them, but their country and their foreign policy. I hate to think what the rest of the world thinks about us, because I know what I think, and what I think is we are America's bitch. We're the little poodle. We go along with whatever they say, and I don't know fucking why. But whatever it is, we need to break away from it, because if we carry on with this, history is not going to remember it. History so far remembers us as can remember us as a brutal empire, yes, a brutal empire. But there is an argument to say that we were a civilizing force as well. There is that argument. There's an argument. There's no argument. There's no other side to what we're doing on the now at the behest of America. This is following a country that is fast moving towards fascism on their coattails and just going along with everything they say. There is no, we're going to be a civilizing force here. We are following fascists into fascism, and that is seriously fucked up, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the years following World War II, in the US, and to a certain extent Britain, got Nazis in their employ in order to pursue their own foreign policy goals.
I mean, new passports and.
Yeah, well, this alliance with fascism isn't anything new, and I mean, even if you go back to the 30s and the eve of World War II, I mean, there was still major segregation in US society. It still resembled very much an apartheid state, which people often forget. I mean, in a certain respects, it still does now, but it's not. It's at least not codified within law. So yeah.
Are you hopeful, mate? I'm hopeful. Strangely enough, I know I come across. I can really come across as a fucking a doom and gloom, especially when I was talking about South America and their future. But are you hopeful? Because I am. I actually am. It's strange. It's really, really weird. I just feel as if it's darkest before the dawn, and right now it's really pretty dark.
Yeah, well, on the Assange point, there's actually quite an interesting debate with him and Slavoj Žižek. basically on the subject of hope, Assange was basically saying, "Our hope is debilitating. It's not constructive. You have to remain cynical, and hope will basically lead you astray, and it will corrupt your cognitive faculties." And Zizek was saying, well, hope is not just this kind of abstract concept. It's actually something that can produce the events that you wish to achieve. And I'd agree with Zizek on that point. I think. You remain hopeful.
I'd agree with Ellis Redding. Oh no, Andy Dufresne. Hope is a good. Perhaps the best.
I thought you were going to say crawling through
crawling through a mile of shit.
60 meters of shit, then you'll come out clean. Well, that also applies somewhat to the.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, Matt? My camera's just gone blurry for some reason.
Oh no, it's all good. If there's nothing else that you wanted to hit on, then
I'm back. No, that was it. Thanks very much for coming on and talking to us about it, Matt. Do you think that they'll get the gold back? Do you just end on that? Do you think they'll ever get it back, or do you think we're just going to go, no? In fact, no, we sold it to Cash for Gold, like I say.
Yeah, I think the UK courts will manage to find some kind of a legal precedent in which they can deny the Maduro government the gold. So I'm not hopeful on that front, but on other fronts, yes.
Proving once again, Magna Carta. Yeah, what's that? Justice? Yeah? Can't hear you. Thanks, John. You're awesome. Where can people find you, mate?
You can find me on Twitter at jmcevoy_2, JMCEVOY_2. You can find me on the Canary, Declassified UK, Tribune, Jacobin, Brazil Wire, etc., etc.
Excellent. I'll put all the links to below underneath, mate. I'll come on and talk to me again. It's brilliant. I love talking.
Yeah, man. Of course. Yeah.
Peace. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care, John.
Cheers. Goodbye.